One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Tai Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Shawn Heilbron. Shawn is the Director of Athletics at Stony Brook University. Greetings, Shawn. Thanks for joining us
Tai,
today.
how are you?
Doing good. Now, Shawn, you've been in your role for 5 years. You've been in college athletics for roughly 24 years. You spent some time outside of college athletics, minor league hockey, some time in the corporate world. So the dynamic between supervisor and the person who's being supervised, or leader and those being led, boss and the person who's working for the boss, you probably have a lot of experience with that. And what I want to tune in on specifically is the dynamic between the director of athletics and the president. And I'm sure in 5 years you've grown and evolved that relationship between you and the president. Can you tell us a little bit about that on campus and what you've seen in college athletics and specifically what you've developed there at Stony Brook?
Well, it's really important to have alignment. That's a word that I use all the time. Alignment is so key. And, for the president, there's so much that crosses, his or her desk. My role as director of athletics is to lead our department, to guide it, to represent the university the right way, to support the mission, and really to be a shining light that our university can be proud of. And we take that responsibility very seriously. And so, the president, I count on that support. I count on the guidance and leadership. But it is really important that the president is in the loop on everything that could positively or negatively come across his desk. So, learning how to communicate, learning how he wants to be communicated with, when, is really key, and something that I've, again, with any supervisor, managing up is so critical. And I think it's something that you have to focus on at all times.
Right. How long did it take you? I mean, you come in, you work 3, 6 months, you're in a year and a half, and obviously that's one of the first things you want to learn is how best to communicate with the president, how best to be effective with their time. How long did that take you to figure out when you were relatively new there at Stony Brook?
I think you've got to really learn very quickly how to manage that. It's not something you can wait a year. I always would tend to over-communicate, certainly early on, until I truly figure out how my president wants to be communicated with. I think you can never go wrong with over-communicating, and that's the one thing. You get in trouble when you don't share. So to me, it's something you have to come in day one with a philosophy as I'm going to give you as much information as I think you need, and then dial it back as you kind of build a working relationship that you can then focus on future how you communicate. But I'd say over-communicate from day one. You can never go wrong with that, and then you dial it back from there.
Is that something that you actually, obviously you said you mentioned it, this is what I'm going to give you initially and then we'll figure it out from here, but do you ask, how do you like to receive information? Or?
You do, and I think it's, that's something that you ask that and you get a specific answer, but you realize too that there's so many things that, again, as an athletic director, you're responsible for the entire department. As a president, you're responsible for the entire university. And so there's so much that you never, ever want your boss to be caught off guard or surprised by anything. So maybe it's just shooting a quick text. Hey, this is happening. When we just had our head basketball coach just left, from the moment he got contacted, just a quick text. Hey, heads up, this could be happening. I've got a plan, don't worry. And, I think ultimately the president should trust, the athletic director to be on top of those things and make those decisions. But realizing too that it's sometimes now with technology, it's really easy to let him know what's going on, or when I need to do something in person or on the phone, it's understanding how to do that as well and when to do it.
Right. Of course, we're here at the 2019 NABC convention, and you talk about the text you sent to your president when your head basketball coach was contacted, right? How did he respond to that? Like, tell me about, because that's the start of a bigger conversation, potentially.
Yeah, I'm really fortunate in that our president, Sam Stanley, he trusts me to make the hires, to run the process. So really, when the moment happened where Jeff Bowles contacted me on the Tuesday that he was looking at Ohio, to the Saturday when he was accepting the job, I kept the president in the loop, but he didn't question, what are we doing? I want to talk to you about it. He knew that I would do my due diligence, and actually met with him a couple days later to tell him who I had spoken to and the direction that I intended to go, and he was completely supportive. And not everyone has that, and I think for athletic departments to thrive, the president has to trust the AD to make those decisions, and or else you just won't have success. And you see too often programs that don't succeed, they probably don't have the alignment that the great programs have.
That kind of takes me to a broader conversation. When you talk about you're working for someone, they give you the responsibility but probably don't give you the authority. Do you have any suggestions for somebody? And you probably in your career have seen or worked for someone who is probably in that situation where you can tell that the person they report to may or may not have all the authority or the trust, right, in communication. How do you suggest in athletics or even beyond athletics people deal with a situation like that?
Well, again, it's true in athletics, it's true in the corporate world, it's true in any enterprise. You have to manage up, and that could be challenging, particularly when you don't have the autonomy or the authority to make certain decisions that you feel that you should. So you have to check your ego at the door a little bit. You have to understand how to ultimately reach your final goal, and that may be a few extra steps. But the over-communication with your supervisor, understanding that is required to ultimately get where you want to go, you just have to do it. So I think there's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not a one-size-fits-all school. There's not a one-size-fits-all supervisor-employee relationship. So you have to figure out how to adapt and be nimble. But that's why the sooner you can learn how your supervisor or your boss wants to be communicated with, how involved do they want to be, that will allow you to have success a lot faster. And you can't get frustrated. You have to understand that this is the situation that you're in. Everyone has a unique set of circumstances, but the key is just to over-communicate and take a deep breath and understand while it might not always be ideal, that person has the authority to say, this is how I want to be involved.
I liken it to my high school coach would always say, if you don't like it, you can turn your stuff in. That's right. And not in those terms, right? So, if you decide a situation is not the best fit for you, then you might try to get out that situation. But when you're in it, try to make the best of it, and over-communicating is basically one way to make the best out of a situation.
It is, and that's why you have to there are people out there too who just, whether it's to be an athletic director or be a head coach, they will just take the job that's open instead of really looking at if it's the right fit for them. Because to have success, you have to have a great relationship with your president. You have to have a great relationship with your AD if it's a coach. And to me, if you get into a situation that is not ideal, you won't have success, and ultimately you'll be looking for a new job sooner rather than later.
I want to ask you one or two more questions about that dynamic with the president, specifically about communication. In 5 years, you've probably been through the ups and downs of running an athletics department. When you get bad news, is it a text? If it's something that you feel like is immediate, of course, as busy as a president is, you shoot a text and say, "Hey, let's talk," or do you put the information in the text and then immediately call? Tell me about how you communicate something.
Yeah, bad news is a call. It's it might be a text saying, "Hey, I need to speak to you." I think a lot of things, particularly bad news, have to be it's got to be addressed either in person or over the phone. That's just, again, that's a little old school, but I think it's, you can't send emails. Again, we're a state school where emails or texts can be, they can be requested by anyone really. But to me, it's still the on the phone, or I'll say, "Hey, can I run over for 5 minutes? Just I want to sit down and walk you through something." I find that's the best way to do it, and then you can really figure out a game plan for how to best move forward. But no one likes to deliver bad news, but it's best done like a Band-Aid. Just rip it off and face to face or on the phone.
Right, exactly. And then the flip side of that, right, the good news. Of course, the president can see victories. The president can see conference championships and that kind of thing. But but do you try your best to involve him when there's something to celebrate that's not public news, but it may be a student athlete who's done something well that the media may not even care about, but internally it's a big thing? Do you?
I do. I think sometimes we don't celebrate enough some of those successes that that happen day to day, and we tend to focus on the huge picture. But I think areas such as our academic performance, or when we do have certain athletes win awards that celebrate their community work. It's one thing. We as athletic directors, we sing the praises when we win of our teams and of our student athletes, but we don't do it enough when it comes to academics and some of the great work that our athletes do in the community. So that is something that I do try to do on a regular basis, because there's so much to celebrate that you don't read about in the paper. And again, we get caught up in the wins and losses because that's ultimately how we're judged. But it really is the culture that we're trying to build that lends itself to the great news that you don't read about, that we need to celebrate more often.
Right, and I'd imagine, as a former student athlete, if the president has taken the time to congratulate me, the athletic director won, right? You're celebrating me, and the president is taking the time to congratulate me on something that I know probably wouldn't be in the paper, but it's important here internally in our on-campus community. That would make me feel great, and actually I would be endeared to the university then if I heard
That's what it's all about, right? I mean, it's all about creating these long-lasting relationships. We have student athletes for 4 or 5 years, but you want to build these lifetime connections, and I think the small things go a long way. I try to know the name of every one of our student athletes. That's hard to do when you have 500, but I think it creates, we talk about, and a lot of departments talk about athletics as a family. You have to practice it too. You have to live it. And I think the president's role in that is important. They're not around our athletes every day, so they don't get a chance to know them as people as much as we do as athletic directors. But the more you can make a department feel like a family, I think the more success you'll have, and the more our student athletes will, again, not only be part of our program for the 4 to 5 years, but really for life.
Right. And I'll wrap with this question here. It's about the relationship between you and your president. The president's been there your full 5 years there at Stony Brook University. Can you identify over the 5 years 1 or 2 inflection points where you've seen your relationship evolve with the president in those 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when you get to work for the president who hired you, it's reassuring because they knew what you were about when you went through the process. But I think as our university, like many around the country, have gone through budget challenges, have gone through some difficult decision making around personnel or around operating budget. I think to have worked through some of these issues together, I think there's been an appreciation on our end of what the university goes through, and I think he's had an appreciation for what sacrifices the athletic department has made as a result. But I just think the more that you work with somebody, you kind of get a chance to really build the relationship, and it's cemented, and you learn how to best work in tandem. And so certainly going through budget issues, going through some difficult, really more through the difficult situations.
That's how you kind of build.
Absolutely, because it's easy again when you're winning championships and everyone's happy. But it's truly in those times of difficulty, that's when I think it further builds the relationship and cements it, that you realize that you're not alone. And I'll go back to the word I started with, it's alignment. And I feel very fortunate to have that, and I think that's 100% paramount when you're talking about the great programs and the average programs.
Right, and make you feel good about the position you're in and that you took the job.
Yes.
And you decided to stay. Well, Shawn, this has been an excellent conversation here, and I really appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Thank you very much, Tai.
That was Shawn Heilbron. He is the Director of Athletics at Stony Brook University. And of course, this is Tai Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.